देवेंद्र जी सेशन स्टार्ट करें। Good morning to everyone. This is Preeti Sagar, and I'm going to discuss editorial which had published in the past 1 week, and it is having relevance for various GS papers in your UPSC examination. So we'll proceed on to first article that is about Anganwadi and importance of Anganwadi. Basically, this article is talking about the need to reopen Anganwadis. India must invest robustly in the world's largest social program on early childhood services. So first you need to understand why Anganwadi and what is the importance of Anganwadi. Basically, if you see, there are various perspectives, various strengths can be seen because of Anganwadi. For example, if I talk about women empowerment, this is related to women empowerment as well. Why? Because most of the Anganwadi workers, they are especially those sections of society who were deprived. That was less educated or uneducated women. So under Anganwadi, who are less educated, like for say, there are certain criteria, they should be 8th standard passed. They should have completed 8th standard till 8th standard studies. So those women who did not had got exposure in their life, now they have got chance to become part of the working society while working in the Anganwadis. Next is what responsibility is given to them. What are the responsibilities? The very, very important responsibility is the nurturing and caring of those children who belongs to lower middle class and who belongs to poor sections of the society, whose parents go out, both the parents go out for the job, and those sections of the society who are lacking in nutrition. So here under Anganwadi, first we have talked about women empowerment. Second is what? That it deals with the problem which India is facing, that is about malnutrition. So just to mitigate malnutrition, this is a very good step that Anganwadis, they provide not only nurturing and caring of children at tender age, but also it is imparting them nutritious food. Okay. Next is what? Its importance in education. So in education front, if you see the early childhood care, not only about food purpose, but also about education. So early childhood care in terms of education, that is also taken care by Anganwadis. Those women who are crusades of Anganwadis, they help such children to at least learn something that is helpful in their nurturing. All right. So there are various importances of Anganwadi, and that you can add in your answer. And this article has talked about why we need to emphasize upon Anganwadi. This is a larger social program. It has been considered, and which is providing early childhood services. All right. So relevance is this article is relevant in social services. Okay, that is related to education, health. So context is what? That being closed since April 2020 lockdown. So last year, 2020, when lockdown had been initiated in India in the last week of March month 2020. So since then, Anganwadis are now slowly reopening. As I've said, that they nurture those children who belongs to deprived sections of the society or low income group sections of the society. So here it means footfall had been there, and every services had been temporarily suspended. So Anganwadi was one of them. So now slowly it is reopening. And in Karnataka, Bihar, Tamil Nadu, these are opening or considering opening shortly. So either that has been opened or these are being in the opening phase. So as part of integrated child development service, Anganwadis plays a crucial role in supporting households, particularly from low-income families, by providing child care, health and nutrition, education, supplementary nutrition, immunization, health checkup, and referral services. So it is not only about, I have only talked about 2-3 things, but here lots of things they cover. They also cover early childhood care in terms of their health checkups. They also talk about supplementary nutrition. Apart from food, supplementary nutrition, it means medicine or any tonic that is provided to the children. uh, then immunization, how immunization will a child will get through vaccination. So lots of things, lots of importances you can see in terms of Anganwadi. So largest in the world, this ICDS, that is Integrated Child Development Service, that covers about 88 million children who are aged between 0 to 6 years in India. Their closure had significantly impacted service delivery and weakened an important social safety net. So, survey had been conducted by IT Insight in 5 of the states in November 2018 and November 2019. So they have found, wait a second. Yeah. So they have found that Anganwadi workers were primary source of nutrition information for such families. And these Anganwadis, basically, they resumed their services. Closure had impacted their ability to serve as child care centers. So, as per National Family Health Service, fifth assessment of it, fifth assessment data that came in 2000 on the basis of 2019-20. Wait a second. Yeah. So less than 15% of 5-year-olds have attended any pre-primary school at all. And as per the recent study, which has estimated that time women spent on unpaid work may have increased by 30% during the pandemic. So during in our COVID-19 rural household surveys across 8 states, 58% of women have cited homeschooling as the biggest contributor to increase in unpaid work. And while sending younger children to Anganwadis will free up women's time, including for economic activities. So early childhood care, the period from birth to 5 years of age, that is considered as early childhood. That is a crucial developmental window. So platform for early childhood education and nutrition support, Anganwadis can play an important role for children to achieve their potential. So basically during this time period of lockdown since a year, women who used to be part of Anganwadis, they had to work for unpaid work, whether it was imparting early schooling education or taking care of children, but they were not getting any payment for this. So being such a platform, what India is having, that is world's largest social platform, Anganwadi is having a very important role to play in achieving such children what their potential they are having. So National Education Policy 2020 that has placed Anganwadi at the center of the push to universalize access to early childhood care and education. So in the last week, government had proposed a phased rollout of early childhood care education program. And what is that? Early childhood care and education. Yeah, program across all the Anganwadis, which is covering 1/5 each year. And it will start from 2021-22. So if we acknowledge their heroic work and push for urgent reopening of Anganwadis, we need to offer solutions to their myriad challenges, whatever challenges they faces. So despite being primary information source on nutrition, Anganwadi workers can lack key knowledge as it had been found in the studies from Delhi and Bihar. So 2 states had been taken care of, UT and state, that is Delhi and Bihar. And on such basis, it was find out that some challenges they are facing. So it is really need to address those challenges and solve them. So surveys that has been conducted in 2018-19 by ID Insight, they have found that among mothers listed with Anganwadi workers, knowledge about key health behavior like complementary feeding, hand washing was low. It was found breastfeeding or complementary feeding, that was 54%, and hand washing, that was 49% of the population follows such norms. So Anganwadi workers, they often do not have support for or training to provide early childhood care education. Administrative responsibilities, this take up significant time. Core services like preschool education are deprioritized. All right. So as I've said, these are importance. All right. But here we need what? We need workforce who are having such knowledge of it. Okay, so typical worker spends on estimated 10% of their time, 28 minutes per day on preschool education, which is compared to the recommended daily 120 minutes It is basically, this is as per the norm that 120 minutes need to be given to those children for their preschooling education, but only 28 minutes are being given, which is 10% of the time. So Anganwadi often lack adequate infrastructure. This is another problem. Niti Aayog has found that only 59% of Anganwadis had adequate seating for children and workers, and more than half were unhygienic. It was found unhygienic condition. So these issues women in an urban context with the utilization of early childhood care services at Anganwadis at only 28%, which is compared to 42% for rural areas, as per NFH's fourth assessment data. So, what is the need of reopening of Anganwadi? So, as Anganwadis reopen, there is a need or must, it should prioritize interventions with a demonstrated history of success and evaluate new ones, how problems can be solved. So studies taken in place in Odisha and Andhra Pradesh and globally, they found that home visits where volunteers work with children and caregivers significantly. It had improved cognition, it has improved language, motor development, and nutritional intake, while also reducing stunting. All right, so stunting, wasting, these are one of the biggest problems where children are found malnutritioned. So stunting is what? Lower height as compared to weight. That is, I guess, stunting. So recent initiatives around home-based newborn and young child. Yeah. So recent initiatives around home-based. Yeah. Newborn and young child care are promising, but they need to extend beyond the first few months of a child's life and seamless coordination with Anganwadi workers. Many states, they will have to improve care incentives, career incentives, and remuneration for Anganwadi workers, basically, if people are working. So what is the inspiration of their work? That is what remuneration. That is remuneration. So here, remuneration and incentives should be given to them, those Anganwadi workers. So one way to ensure that they have more time to hire additional workers at Anganwadis. Recent study taken place in Tamil Nadu has found that an additional worker devoted to preschool education led to cost-effective gains in both learning as well as nutrition. Policymakers, they have tried linking Anganwadis and primary schools to strengthen convergence as well as expanding the duration of daycare at Anganwadis. Reaching out to women during pregnancy, it can increase the likelihood that their children use ICDS services as it was tried in Tamil Nadu. And to boost coverage as they reopen, large-scale enrollment drives that had been worked in Gujarat may help mobilize eligible children for this. So, as the world's largest provider of early childhood services, Anganwadis perform a crucial role in contributing to life outcomes of children across India. And to improve these outcomes, we need to invest more significantly in Anganwadis and roll out proven innovations interventions. So basically here challenges had been discussed, importance of Anganwadi had been discussed, how it can resolve the problem that had been discussed. All right. So some states had been considered, study had been taken place, whether it was Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, Bihar, where infrastructure related issues, education related issues that has been discussed. It means that is really required to work upon. Then only we can see innovative interventions are required. And if these innovative intervention will be there, then improvement in terms of education, in terms of early childhood care for fooding, education, health, mother care, as well as the workers of Anganwadis. So in all such areas, we'll see many, many improvements, and it will be a very strong pillar for the society development. That is all about this article. Moving on to the next one. Putin's visit must be used to realize the potential of India-Russia ties. So basically, recently, Putin has visited India, and this article had written before his visit. So basically, in this article, it was discussed about what are the potential areas on which India and Russia needed to work together. That has been discussed in this article. So context is what, that as Prime Minister Narendra Modi and visiting Russian President Vladimir Putin try to reset their relationship today. Today, that was the day when this article had been written, amidst in the series of recent differences that has been ranged from Afghanistan, Pakistan to the Indo-Pacific. Two factors will continue to limit the possibilities for bilateral partnerships. One, that is continuing conflict between Kremlin and West, and other is the absence of a thriving commercial relationship between India and Russia. So it has mentioned that these two issues will become a blockade between India and Russia relationship, or it will create a conflict between India and Russia relationship. So if we talk about their ties, so as per the recent story of India-Russia relations, that is about keeping an old romance alive as Delhi and Moscow align with more attractive partners. So everybody knows that when India got independence, and in fact, India's independence was having a largest impression of socialism, communism, which has its birth on the soil of Russia, and it has reached to various parts of the world and India as well. So our Indian national freedom movement, that was somewhere inspired by socialism, which has originated on the lands of Russia. It reached to different parts of the world, as I've said later on. So if we talk about India and Russia relations, so after independence, India remained to be non-aligned. And why? Because world was divided into two powers, that was socialism and capitalism. India never wanted to become part of any of the blocks, never wanted to go towards socialism, hardcore, and hardcore capitalism. So what India did, India chosen a midway. Okay, that was mixed economy, mixture of both capitalism as well as socialism. So in fact, our constitution, which has been amended in 1942 at the large scale, it also added social. India had been constituted as a socialist country. It means social welfare program are one of the genesis of our constitution. Why? Because its aim is to give social empowerment to the deprived section of the society. All right. So from where we have taken this, we have taken this idea, we have adopted this idea from Russia. So it means welfare measures for those sections of the society who have been deprived in the history, who have been deprived in the current past. So for them, these social welfare measures are taken under the ambit of socialism, which has its birth on Russia, on the soil of Russia or USSR then. Another thing is that because of this, what has happened, despite of being the fact we were non-aligned, but the heart and soul of India, that was more bent towards socialism till 1990s, till 1991 when we adopted LPG reforms. So till then, our economy was moving on this pattern socialism basically. Moreover, it was not open, but moreover, it was somewhere. So this is what the old romance of India and Russia that has been alive when, why? Because both the countries, they are attractive partners since the past. So if Delhi's love affair with Washington has never been as intense as it is today, it means India and USA. Moscow's embrace of Beijing is tighter than ever. So nowadays, this romance had been infringed by two countries, that is USA and China. So USA is now an extramarital affair is going on between India and USA and Russia and China. So the love affair of India and Russia, that has been somewhere hampered because of these two countries. So that USA and China are now at each other's throats makes the great power dynamic a lot more complicated for India and Russia. So basically nowadays we are seeing that India and Russia, they have kept alive their defense partnership, their defense ties, their economic relationship. Moreover, their focus is on defense ties. um, since independence, we are seeing that India and Russia, they had been defense partners. India had imported many of the technologies, defense technologies from Russia nowadays as well. Under CATS, there are threat from USA on India. If it will go on its defense ties with Russia, then sanctions can be put on India. But despite of such threats, India had taken its own step. India has kept alive its defense ties, defense partnership with Russia, under which India is getting S-400 missile technology. All right. So these things are there that we'll talk about one by one. So this would not have mattered if Russia had a sensible relationship with America and India's ties with China were peaceful and stable. So both the new partners of India and Russia, that is USA and China, if we would have if we would have been a good relationship, then this type of division would not have seen. So Delhi and Moscow, that is India and Russia, they have problems with the best friends of the other world. Other would have been more manageable if business ties between India and Russia were solid. Intensifying the strategic side of relationship, as Modi and Putin are expected to do this week, that is not enough to lift the bilateral relationship out of the status it finds itself in. And as per the recent summit, we'll see the institution of a new 2+2 mechanism that brings the foreign and defense ministers from both the sides into a single forum. So that is a speculation about new 10-year defense pact between two countries. Two leaders are also expected to preside over the signing of an agreement on mutual logistical support for each other's armed forces. India has such agreements only with the select few partners like USA and France. So under logistical support, what happens, this is also a defense partnership basically. So they can interoperate their logistics whenever situation arises, or they uh, have some needs. So these type of logistical support or agreement can be seen between India and USA, India and France, and now India and Russia is also moving towards it. All right. So, where India and Russia, they have greater freedom in their economic domain, but their failure to boost commercial relationship had been stark. So, during last 20 summits with Putin, the two sides have repeatedly affirmed the importance of enhancing trade and investment ties, but progress has been hard to come over this. And India and Russia annual trade in goods that has been stuffed at $10 billion, which is in contrast. Moscow's annual commerce with China is little more, that is $100 billion. India's good trade with USA and China, that has been set at the level of $100 billion. So it is somewhere 1/10 of trade India is doing with Russia. So despite political tensions, India's China trade continues to grow, while Delhi's commercial ties with Moscow are stagnant despite good political relations. So problem clearly can't be fixed at the level of governments. Russian business elites gravitate to Europe and China. Indian corporations are focused on America and China. Russia, that is acutely conscious of the huge imbalance in its great power relations. President conflict with USA, Europe, and Japan have moved Moscow even closer to China, and Russia knows the dangers of relying solely on a neighbor which has risen to greatness. That is Chinese economy, which was nearly at $15 trillion today, and it is nearly 10 times larger than that of Russia. So while resetting Russia's relations with the West is hard, and sustaining the traditional partnership with India is of some political value to Russia. Delhi, which is hoping that USA appreciates its assessment that Russian neutrality, if not support, is critical in balancing China in the eastern side. And Russia knows India's strategic cooperation with USA had acquired an unstoppable momentum. And India knows it has no veto over Sino-Russian strategic partnership. So both the countries, India and Russia, they are learning to live with this uncomfortable unreality and stabilizing their political ties within that context. But both the countries have no reason to be satisfied with the poor state of their commercial ties. So success of recent summit that has lied not in squeezing more out of bilateral defense ties, but in laying a clear path for expansive economic cooperation and generating a better understanding of each other's imperatives on Afghanistan and Indo-Pacific region or matters. That is all about this article. Moving on to the next one. We'll talk about another article on India and Russia in detail. So next article is a docket full of unresolved constitutional cases. These involve crucial questions about state power, accountability, and impunity, and cannot be left hanging by the courts. So Basically, in this article, constitutional cases which are still unresolved had been discussed about how accountability and impunity had been questioned, and what important steps are needed to be taken by the judiciary. That we'll talk about in this article. So while framing of the Indian constitution, it has proposed that any petition which is alleging a breach of fundamental rights by the state, that ought to be judicially decided within month. It means there was a time limit given for such cases which is violating fundamental right. While proposal did not find its way into the text of the constitution, and it nonetheless articulated something of great importance. Between the individual and the state, there exists a substantial asymmetry of power. Asymmetry, it means inequality of power. And the violation of rights, whether through executive or legislative action, is relatively costless for the state. It is the individual or individuals who pay the price and who must then run from pillar to post to vindicate their constitutionally guaranteed rights. So, as a result, a constitution is entirely ineffective if a rights violating status quo is allowed to exist and perpetuate for months or even years before it is finally resolved. And often by the time resolution comes, it is too late in the day for it to have any practical significance. So basically, this article is in the context of the cases which is filed against violation of rights, but a constitution had discussed about that these cases should be resolved within a month, but nothing had come out. So what are the consequences of it? That has been discussed in this article. So basically, that's a point which is not limited to the violation of rights, but it extends to all the significant constitutional questions that arise in the course of controversial state action. So basically, fundamental rights, these are limited rights which are given in the part 3 of the constitution, and these rights are given against state and authorities that comes under the definition of states. Okay, state maybe parliament, state legislature, local bodies, any authority which has been created by the government. So these comes under the purview of definition of state under Article 12. So basically, so issues. So if we talk about violation of fundamental rights, so that is against the state. State means the definition of state. That may be anyone which I have mentioned. So issues around federal structure, elections, and many others all involve question of power and accountability. Federal structure, that is relationship between center and states. Elections and other matters. So all which involve questions of power and accountability. And the longer that courts take to resolve such cases, the more we move from a realm of accountability to a realm of impunity. Sorry. So in this context, as 2021 draws a close, a look at the Supreme Court of India's docket reveals a host of slightly significant constitutional cases that had been long pending when year had started, and now these are simply a year older without any sign of resolution around the corner. All such cases involve crucial questions about state power, accountability, and impunity, and how these states are impugned basically against these fundamental rights. So, consequently, the longer they are left hanging without a decision, the greater the damage that is inflicted upon our constitutional democracy's commitment to the rule of law. What rule of law says? Rule of law says that nobody is equal before the law. Everybody is equal in the eyes of law. No discrimination would be imparted on regarding law. Everybody is equal before the law, basically. So that is rule of law. So here, if such cases will be long pending, then it will impact constitutional democracy, which is a commitment towards rule of law. So what are some of the cases? So first is what? There is constitutional challenge to the presidential orders of 5th August 2019 that has effectively diluted Article 370 of the Indian Constitution, which has bifurcated the state of Jammu and Kashmir into two UTs, and these are controlled by center. Basically, when Article 370 had been revoked, if you remember, it was the time when Jammu and Kashmir was under president's rule. And if any and this is a federal structure related matter, so if any federal structure related matter has to be taken care of, that has to be taken care while consulting that state which is going to be impacted. So when state was not in power, when state was suspended, state government was suspended, and presidential order, presidential rule had been imposed, that was governor's rule had been imposed, so it means it was direct under the control of president. And in such a case, and there was no voice of representatives of that state. So in that situation, what parliament did, parliament came up with the presidential order on 5th of August 2019. It revoked Article 370, which granted special status to Jammu and Kashmir, where they had separate constitution, they had separate flag, they had various freedoms had been given under this. So it was revoked, diluted, and now it was from statehood it had been degraded to union territory and bifurcated into two. Now direct control of Jammu and Kashmir, that came in the hands of parliament under president, basically not parliament, but president is part of parliament, so under president it had come. So there is widespread tendency to view the Kashmir question has been settled even after the events of that day, 5th of August 2019, with it now being a political impossibility to return to the pre 2019 status quo. So, something which has happened, now we are seeing that everything is now resolved. But the thing is, the process which has taken place to do this, whether it was constitutional or not, whether it was violating of fundamental rights or not, fundamental rights of people or not. So, regrettably, this tendency seems to have gripped the court as well as in how assiduously it has avoided hearing and deciding the case. But politics aside, the case raises certain fundamental questions about constitutional power and accountability. So, first, it has raised the question of whether the center can take advantage of Article 356 situation in a state that is a time when no elected government and assembly is in existence, to make permanent and irreversible alterations in the very structure of the state itself. That is a fundamental question. Then answer will have important ramifications not just for JNK but for the entire federal structure. That India has a long history of abuse of 356 article to get rid of inconvenient state governments, and a further expansion of power already enjoyed by the center will skew an already tilted federal scheme even further. So it means it is not the first time when something has happened, but in the past it has been happened. And in the name of constitution, we do it, and no constitutional validity is being checked even earlier and later. So second, that is the case also raises the question of whether under the constitution, the union legislature has the authority to simply to alter state boundaries as per Article 3. What are the powers given to parliament? They can alter the state boundary. They can uh, make they can change the name of the state. All right. So power which is granted to parliament under Article 3 of the constitution, but degradation of a state to an into a UT, that has never been done before 5th of August 2019. So parliament, they can change, they can make some alteration in the boundaries. They can alter it while adding or skewing the state boundary limits, but they cannot change the statehood of any state. So if it turned out that union legislature does have this power, and before doing this, what parliament has to do, they had to ratify it by from the state itself. So if it turned out that union legislature does have this power, it would essentially mean that India's federal structure is entirely at the mercy of parliament. And parliament could then constitutionally convert India from a union of state to a union of territories if it so wanted. So what is Article 1 says? Article 1 says that India, that is union of states. So if something is happening, it means where we are moving towards, we are not union of states, we are moving towards union of union territories. That is the meaning of it. All right. So that has been said in this article. Now, needless to say this, wait a second. Yeah, so needless to say, this that would signal a hugely significant shift in power to the center. And as long as both these questions remain undecided, however, the acts of August 5, 2019 remain legally valid, with the prospect that it may well be repeated in other parts of India or not. So for this question, Supreme Court's now 2.5 year delay in hearing and answering these questions is unconscious, conscionable. And another long pending case is the constitutional challenge to the electoral bond scheme that has now crossed 4 years now. So electoral bond schemes, basically, it has authorized limitless anonymous corporate donations to political parties, which is making election funding both entirely opaque to the people, as well as being structurally biased towards the party that is in the power at the center. So what was election bond? Election bond, basically, it was a scheme where people, if they want to donate money into in any of the political party of their like, so they can do that. Their identity will not be revealed. Okay, so in that situation, what has happened? Many of the corporate bodies who are having their interest in the powerful, in the party which is in the power, all right, so they will be binding towards them, they will be tilting towards them. There is no identification of such people. So these parties, those parties who are in the power, they will remain in the power on the basis of election funding, and we do not have any chance to identify them. There may be some terrorist activities or terrorist groups who can purchase those bonds and who can donate through such bonds. So there are various consequences of it. So it has made the entire process of donation opaque to the people, and structurally it is biased towards the party who's in the power at the center. So in numerous central and state election cycles in the last 4 years, thousands of crores of rupees have spent in anonymous political donations, and it has impacting not only the integrity of the election process but also the constitutional right of citizens to an informed vote. So whom they are voting, we do not get information of it. So, however, other than two interim orders, Supreme Court has refused to accord a full hearing of the constitutional challenge. In a few months' time, it will be one full 5 year cycle of central and state elections, with the case still awaiting a hearing, another black mark of the court's records. So it is important to note that in both these cases, Supreme Court's inaction is not neutral, but rather it favors the beneficiary of the status quo. And in other words, by not deciding, court is in the effect deciding in favor of one party, but without a reasoned judgment that justifies its stance. So other cases which are pending before the court, like this is also true for a number of other cases which are pending before the court, like as far back as in 2013, Guwahati High Court has held that CBI was not established under statutory authority, and this verdict was immediately stayed when it was appealed to the Supreme Court, but in the intervening years, it has never been heard. And CBI continues to function, often controversially now, despite a judgment by a constitutional court that has found its very existence to be illegal. And more recently, constitutional challenge to the Citizenship Amendment Act that has been filed in the immediate aftermath of the legislation's enactment that remained unheard, as do the challenges to the much criticized Section 43D, Clause 5 of the UAPA, which makes the grant of bail effectively impossible and is responsible for the years long incarceration of several people. So, challenge to Section 43D5 is perhaps the case that most directly affects civil rights, as the section continues to be applied on a regular basis. Most notoriously, in the recent times, Bhima Koregaon case we have seen, and the cases of this kind are legion. So, how it leads to judicial evasion. So, apart from benefiting the party that profits from the status quo, which we have seen invariably in the state, judicial evasion of this kind is also damaging for the accountability of the judiciary itself. Once court decides a case, its reasoning that must, by definition, be the public can be publicly scrutinized, and if needed, it needed, it can be critiqued. So, in the absence of decision, and court's inaction plays as significant a role on the grounds as it does action, there is no judgment, no reasoning that public can engage with. And for obvious reasons, this too has a serious impact on the rule of law. It must be acknowledged that the responsibility for constituting benches and scheduling cases, especially the cases that are due to be heard by larger benches that rest solely with the Chief Justice of India. And the three previous CJIs, they had been criticized for excessive deferences to the executive. The current CJI has been on record stressing the importance of the rule of law and independence of judiciary. And one way of demonstrating that in action might be to hear and decide the important constitutional cases that has been pending before the court as soon as possible. That is all about this article. Moving on to the next one. End the impunity. The botched army operation in Nagaland is yet another reason why AFSPA should go. So basically, this article is in the context of the recent incident that has been taking place in Nagaland, where some of the civilians they were going and they had been stopped by the army who had been deployed in Nagaland, and some confusion was prevailing that they were having some information about terrorist activities, and in that confusion civilians had been killed, civilians had been fired upon, and many people had been killed and injured. So it is basically what it shows the negative side of AFSPA, that is Armed Force Special Powers Act, which had been implied in such insurgent areas of earlier it was in Jammu and Kashmir and in some of the northeastern states as well. So basically here this article is talking about why AFSPA should go from Nagaland and other areas of northeastern states. So context is what, notwithstanding the rationale provided by the Union government and armed forces of the horrific killing of 6 coal miners and deaths of 9 civilians and soldiers in the aftermath of the incident in the Mon district, the residents of Nagaland and indeed many in the northeast India, they will only read this incident as an outcome of impunity that is accorded by Armed Forces Special Powers Act or AFSPA. So it is no wonder that two chief ministers, that was Conrad Sangma of Meghalaya and nephew Rio of Nagaland, they have immediately demanded its repeal. And the act remains in place in Assam, Nagaland, Manipur, 3 districts of Arunachal Pradesh, and areas which are falling within the jurisdiction of 8 police stations of these states, which are bordering Assam, with the authority to use force or open fire to maintain public order in the disturbed areas. So firing on the vehicle which had carried coal miners in Outing village, and that is home to the Koyank Naga community, had carried out by soldiers of 21 Para Commando Unit and attributed to a case of mistaken identity. This action should be problematic even within the purview of AFSPA, as soldiers who open fire can do so only after warning the person found in contravention of the law. So armies and later Union Minister of Home Amit Shah's contention that the vehicle was shot at only after the miners refused to cooperate when asked to stop seems incongruous, as this was not an action at the Myanmar border seeking to take on armed infiltrators, but an operation well within the country's boundaries. So that an ambush had been purportedly led on insurgents of the NSC, and that is Khaplang Yung Ong faction, following an intelligence input, and a civilian vehicle that offered no hostility was fired upon. So it is suggesting that armed forces were too trigger happy and showed barely any intent in securing order, which is the purpose of their presence in the region. So government, they have promised an inquiry by special investigation team. It is clear that continued reliance on AFSPA as a way to impose public order must be brought to a halt, and the long pending demand for its repeal acceded to. Unfortunately, this incident could put a spanner in the Naga peace talks between government and the National Socialist Council of Nagaland, that is NSCNIM, and 7 Naga national political groups for a solution that has been in the works. So secretive nature of the talks, largely due to government smoke and mirrors approach to the peace accord, has not helped matters either. And an approach that shows genuine remorse for the actions brings the culprits to book and seeks rapprochement with the Koyank Nagas through compensation for the violence, besides a renewed purpose to conclude the peace talks with the Naga groups, is now the only imperative. So, because of this attack, it has hampered peace talk between government and Naga peace talk. So, we need to keep our eyes. We need to analyze the situation. What is going to happen next? So that is all about this article. Moving on to the next one. The way to tackle malnutrition, it is high time that process of monitoring nutrition got importance over survey outcomes. So here, how malnutrition need to be tackled, that has been discussed in this article, malnutrition issue. So National Family Health Survey of fifth edition of it shows negligible gains in nutritional outcomes among under 5 children. There has been tardy progress in reducing undernutrition, wasting, and stunting. That is a national shame that even now 35.5% of under 5 children are stunted and 19.3 are wasted. Childhood anemia has worsened from the fourth assessment of National Family Health Survey. Anemia among adolescent girls and women aged between 15 to 49 has also been worsened. And the institutional delivery has gone up. Early initiation of breastfeeding is static. So, if we are serious about a healthy wage and a healthy new generation, we must ensure proper nutrition and growth. So while we need to monitor data for problematic evaluation and correction, the question is what type of data do we need to help starving children? Is it a data on how much food is applied, served, and consumed, or data on what went wrong and the prevalence of weight loss and growth stagnation? Do we need output or impact data or input and process data with their quality parameters? So we need to monitor the input and process indicators. That is how we can rectify past mistakes. Data generated quickly can lead to mid-course corrections. Data-driven planning and strategies lead to good governance with accountability. So after monitoring successful initiation of breastfeeding in the hospital, Anganwadi workers, ASHA workers, and auxiliary nurse midwives, they must continue to monitor exercise breastfeeding till the infant is 6 months old. So basically, breastfeeding is highly recommendable to those children who are in between the age of infant and 6 months. Why? Because mother milk is much more nutritious as compared to any other source of food, and it helps to mitigate nutrition issues as well. So they must record the timely initiation for complementary feeding with soft gruel. If this step is missed, growth faltering starts. And this is the critical period of growth that we cannot afford to compromise on. So we must also ensure that there is a take-home ration for under 3 children through a regular supply of supplementary nutrition from the Integrated Child Development Services. So we must also need to know whether Anganwadis are intermittently closed without any valid reason, whether supervisors are erratic in field monitoring, how we can capture the regularity and quantity of dry rations supplied to Anganwadi work centers and schools for midday meals, whether there is live web-based centrally monitorable data on the movement of dry rations to Anganwadis and schools. Basically, dry ration is what? Food in dry form, wheat, rice, pulses, these are dry rations. So if they are not able to provide midday meal schools, then they can give every children dry ration. So whether parents and teachers can monitor the serving of hot cooked meals, whether self-help groups of women are involved in preparing the menu and procuring local available vegetables, grains, and millets to ensure dietary diversification, and whether eggs are being denied or stopped for socio-political reasons. So what goes into the family pot is also very important. That depends on what parents can earn and their purchasing capacity. So it is important to monitor Mahatma Gandhi Narega work days, as well as the wages, what they earn in the areas where droughts frequently recur, where there is mass migration, and where there is prevalence of high malnutrition. The National Nutrition Monitoring Bureau has been shut down some years ago, so we don't know what families can afford to cook and what they are cooking. So, real time monitoring of the public distribution system that will go a long way in ensuring food at the family level. Except in a few states where web based portals are functioning, there is no monitoring of when PDS shops are open, as well as quantity and quality of dry ration supplied. And basically, unfortunately, PDS is a hunger mitigation mechanism, but it does not enable nutrition security. And the aim of National Food Security Act of 2013 is to ensure that nobody goes to bed hungry and there is no starvation. But the PDS is focused on procuring wheat and rice through Food Corporation of India to distribute to families. And centrally, cereals that fills the stomach and hunger is averted, but not malnutrition. So there seems to be an aversion to facts and to reality that demands immediate action, and many established surveys seem to have methodological errors. Consumer Expenditure Survey has resulted of 2017-18 was withheld. And both Poshan Abhiyan and Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana that need to be monitored with the help of community to ensure sustainable nutrition security. Little of more what is happening in the field right now reaches program managers and policy makers for timely action. So, what is the point of crying over spilt milk? Malnourished children do not need repeated surveys that confirm our apathy and heartless inaction. But here, what is required, the requirement is the action that need to be taken for the improvement of such children. That is all about this article. Next one, that is about India and Russia relationship. So, a robust friendship, India and Russia have to navigate a complex geopolitical landscape while deepening ties. So this is another article where it has suggested what India and Russia should do. So, context is what that Russian President Vladimir Putin had concluded a short summit meeting with Prime Minister Narendra Modi in New Delhi, which has highlighted the all weather partnership between the two countries despite trying global circumstances. So, not only does the president's visit come as the world faces the grim prospect of the Omicron variant of the COVID 19 pandemic, but it also follows years of growing proximity between India and China, USA, a potential irritant to Russia. Simultaneously, China factor has been steadily pulling India-Russia bilateral tango in all the wrong directions we have talked about. So Russia relies on cordial ties with China to stabilize its interest in an unstable Afghanistan post USA's exit. India and Beijing, they have scarcely seen eye to eye on border tensions and geopolitical rivalry across the Asian region. So, notwithstanding these reasons for possible strategic dissonance, India and Russia reaffirmed the strength of their abiding deep, multi decade ties, building further confidence in each other through substantive defense agreements. Moscow, which has agreed on a 10-year military technical plan that includes technology transfers to India, and trade, which received a flip through an agreement for India to produce more than 6 lakh Kalashnikov assault rifles. So, for India's part, despite resistance from Washington through its countering America's adversaries through Sanctions Act, India will proceed with purchasing S-400 missile defense system from Russia. So, challenges facing both the prime ministers in terms of maintaining this momentum in bilateral exchanges and multidimensional. First, as more immediately, pandemic has periodically crippled the growth of both the economies, and it has become a threat to public health remains despite considerable process with vaccination. Secondly, Russia USA ties are showing signs of fraying yet again. This time over, US President Joe Biden's intention reportedly to warn Mr. Putin that Russia will face economy jarring sanctions. It is if it seeks to occupy Ukraine, a fear that has that has been grown in the USA as Russian troops had massed near the Ukraine border. So India has so far held firm to its mantra of strategic autonomy in a multipolar world. Well, but South Bloc will have to work hard to manage the tightrope action between Russia and USA. Third, India and China They have forged an uneasy truce across their Himalayan border in the aftermath of the Galwan Valley exchange in 2020. There are numerous potential flashpoints that could send ties into a spiral again. This includes China's historically provocative measures in South China Sea and its thinly veiled insecurity about India joining the Quad for Indo-Pacific country security. So Russia has adroitly managed to remain friends with both its mega neighbors, but it will require a robust focus on confidence-boosting cooperative initiatives if India and Russia are to safely navigate the complex geopolitical landscape that can occupy. That is all about this article. Moving on to the next one. Mediation bill not getting the act together while it contains many pulses. The bill needs improvement in some crucial places. So basically, what is the meaning of mediation? Basically, whenever any dispute arises, so mediation process takes place so that dispute can be resolved before it reaches to the court. So it will reduce the time of pendency of the cases, reduction of cases, time limit will be reduced. So these things are there. So context is what over the last 15 years, dispute resolution landscape in India has undergone significant change with the advent of mediation. And to house this consensual creature in the same stables as thoroughbreds of adversarial litigation and arbitration was a challenge, and even more to ensure that they got on reasonably well, working in tandem in inventive ways like arbitration cum mediation and vice versa. So it seems to be the way of world that when something becomes prominent, there must be a law to regulate it, and that is with the mediation. While scattered mention was made of its use in several statutes that includes commercial and consumer disputes, there was no comprehensive statute providing for all dimensions and mediation process and its practice. So a need had been articulated in several quarters that notwithstanding doubters and dissenters who insist that regulation will kill the free spirit that mediation embodies, and a group of senior mediators that was set up by Supreme Court committee in charge of court annexed mediation process, and over a period of several months a draft bill had emerged which then started to make its way through labyrinth process of government and legislative mandarins. So the resultant bill, which is titled Draft Mediation Bill 2021, slated for presentation now to Parliament, that bears no resemblance to the original in some crucial places. It reminds that the mediation community of an old Clint Eastwood film, that is The Good, Bad and Sad. So, what is good in the bill? The bill that has recognized the mediation has come of age and needs to be treated as a profession, which is a huge improvement over the part-time honorarium basis it has in the court annexed mediation scheme. So basically, in this mediation, what will happen? Some people they will get job as a mediation, so they will have their clients, they will work individually. So bill acknowledges importance of institutes to train mediators and service providers to provide structured mediation under their rules, provide pre-litigation mediation. This is quite a remarkable step, but it's designed to be easy to implement. So parties, they are required to have at least one substantive session with the mediator where the process is explained to them. Thereafter, they are free to continue or terminate the mediation and follow the litigation path if they so decide. So one person, one official had to be there who's having idea of mediation, and he will meet the client. If they are ready with the mediation, then process will go on. If they do not, then they go for litigation. Further, if any urgent interim order is needed, they can bypass mediation at the first stage and return to it after resolving the interim relief issues. Another plus is the bill that is that the bill does away with the confusion emanating from using both expressions mediation and conciliation in different statutes by opting for the former in accordance with the international practice and defining it widely to include the latter. So it has recognized online dispute resolution, a process that is going on going to move mediation from the wings to center stage in the world that COVID-19 has changed. And it provides for enforcement of commercial settlements that is reached in international mediation between parties from different countries as per the Singapore Convention on Mediation, to which India was a notable signatory. So the convention assures disputants that their mediation settlements will be enforced without much difficulty across the world, and unlike the fresh headaches that the litigative decree or arbitration award present at the time of enforcement. Now, there are some bads in the bill. So, leading in from the last point, it is expected that this bill would make India a hub for international mediation in the commercial disputes field, and indeed, institutions are being opened for such purposes. Exactly the reverse may happen. That is because bill unwisely treats international mediation when conducted in India as a domestic mediation. So, settlement under the domestic mediation is given the status of a judgment or decree of a court, and it is excellent for cases between Indian parties but disastrous when party is foreign. And the reason is that Singapore Convention does not apply to settlements which already have the status of a judgment or decree. So, ergo, if you conduct your cross-border mediation in India, you lose out on the tremendous benefits of worldwide enforceability. And in some, go to the Singapore, Sri Lanka, or anywhere else other than India to conduct your mediation. So, if this drafting mismatch is not remedied, dreams of our robust hubs and ease of doing business in India are nearly nipped in the bud. And then comes governing mechanism council, which is a three-member body, a retired senior judge, a person with experience of alternate dispute resolution law, and an academic who has taught alternate dispute resolution. So this is an all-powerful body that regulates, certifies, accredits, plans, governs, etc., and it doesn't have a single mediator. So, judging from the fact that these are full time members, it is clear that none of them will be active practitioners. Most likely, we are looking at censures of the for the bureaucratic and academic world. And certainly, this bill will be unique where a profession is being regulated without a single professional on the regulator. So, by trying doing that to lawyers, doctors, and accountants, and one more lapse, this is the field of dispute resolution, the judiciary's domain. So, how come the Chief Justice of India is not in the picture for making appointments? There is a long list of disputes that should not be mediated. Some of them look understandable at first sight, but unnecessary at second. And fraud, for example, it is the standard practice in litigation to make as many and as serious charges as possible. That doesn't prevent parties from setting, and these accusations are disposed of by retraction or apology, or simply ignored. In cases that involve minors or persons of unsound mind, the law provides for the court to pass orders to protect them. All that is necessary is to provide that any settlement of disputes involving them need the court's approval, not to deny the possibility of a beneficial mediated settlements. Patents and copyright cases that settle on commercial terms, leaving untouched the validity of the grant. So, why deny this possibility and consign the parties to litigative longevity? In such case of telecom, why can't manufacturers and service providers and consumers be allowed to talk and resolve issues? Then there are some sad about the bill. So why can't we get our act together to get mediation bill in good shape? Why can't all the stakeholders get bills together? Mediator, lawyers, judges, they have applied their minds to a considerable degree. And to be fair to the government, it did call for comments on the draft bill. What is missing is the element of focused and engaged discussion after comments are sent. It is as though as a wall has been erected and no one knows what is going to emerge. We all have a common purpose to place mediation strongly in our legal landscape and place India prominently in world's mediation landscape. So even if it takes more discussion and consideration among all the stakeholders, let that to be done. It is for Parliament now to do the needful. We should not settle for less. So basically, this bill has been introduced in the Parliament. Discussion has to be go on. Then we will see what comes out of this discussion and in the form of law regarding mediation. So basically, some of the concerns had been arised over here, where party will be foreigner, one party will be foreigner, one will be Indian. So what type of mediation it will be? The international mediation or domestic mediation? What are the divisions of international mediation and domestic mediation? That is need to be considered. All right. So this is all about this article. Moving on to the next one. Russia, a legacy partner relationship with limitations. The India Russia relationship stands deeply strained by larger geopolitical realities, but there is scope for improved ties. So, context of this article is what that Russian President Vladimir Putin's visit to New Delhi or India, and the inaugural of 2+2 meeting between both the countries, in which India, that is India's fourth such engagement with another country, and it will help improve their ties, India-Russia ties. Currently, it is fraying under pressure of larger global power shifts. Of all the diplomatic balancing acts India has to play in the milieu of geopolitical uncertainty, and the one with Russia is the most significant. So another thing is what in the ongoing flurry of activity between India and Russia, not blind us to the global forces. Just a moment. Sorry. So in this diplomatic balancing act, which in what India is playing in the milieu of geopolitical uncertainty, in which where Russia is the most significant, and the ongoing flurry of activity between both the countries, not blind us to the global forces, that is going to pose formidable challenges for the partnership between India and Russia. So, what are the international dynamics in which both the countries have been, both the countries are having prism of? So, the concept of primacy, primary and secondary antagonisms to understand the dynamics of this sport better. So, to a great extent, it is not entirely the dynamic of this six-way relationship at the apex that is a function of US-China rivalry. So, in this six-way matrix, China-USA antagonism is the first order relationship with US-Russia, China-Russia, Russia-India are the second order relationships. And while the second order relationship in this quad, to a great extent, that is a product of primary antagonism. Second tier relationship also have their own unique dynamics and implications of it. Like for instance, India-China, which is a second order relationship in this quad, is both a product of primary antagonism between USA and China, as well as a result of regional geopolitical rivalry between India and China. Even though China remains its primary antagonism, Washington has not yet succeeded in divorcing its less challenging second order antagonism, in which rivalry with Russia can be seen. So, USA's parallel rivalry with China and Russia, towards a lesser extent, have complicated matters for India. So it appears to be a near certainly in the medium to longer term is that the dynamics of the quadrilateral relationship, in particular India's tense relations with China, will go on to complicate India's time-tested partnership with Russia, which is the process that already had been started. And even though Beijing has not aggressively attempted to damage India Russia relations, there is little doubt that China will attempt to drive a wedge between India and Russia, since isolating India in the larger Asian region, which suits China's larger game plan. So, It may get more complicated if we examine the various potential scenarios in this quadrilateral relationship. For instance, the extent of Chinese aggression towards India will play a role in determining India's relationship with Russia. And an aggressive China will push India towards the USA, and even though Russia would be understanding towards India's rationale behind such a pro US tilt in the medium term, India's relationship with USA will invariably create hurdles in India-Russia relations in the longer term. Russian Foreign Ministry Sergei Lavrov's warning to India should be read in that context. We expressed our serious concern to our Indian friends over USA activity where India-Pacific region under the slogan of so-called Indo-Pacific strategies and creation of closed block-type structures. So, by putting it differently, more aggressive China gets towards India, and more India would grow closer to USA and Russia. So, Moscow, that is Russia, would appreciate a close partnership with India. It may not be when it comes to a growing India USA partnership. And moreover, if Russia has to choose between China and India, it would choose China, just as India would choose Washington or USA over Russia if it comes to that. So it also implies that an aggressive China may also help increase India Russia relations in the short to medium term, something we need to already witness. Recalling Defense Minister Rajnath Singh's visit to Russia in the month of June 2020, soon after standoff started between India and Chinese troops on line of actual control, which has procured more weapon systems, among other things. And in the meantime, it has been seen unresolved first order antagonism that was USA versus China, which has provided a space for geopolitical hedges in the second order partnership between India, Russia, and Russia, USA. For instance, Russia's dominant concerns about China's rising influence in its traditional periphery and Russia's relationship with India in the broader context of Central and West Asia and Western Indian Ocean could prompt Russia to maintain a certain degree that is a limited geopolitical relationship with China. So India's desire to have a robust relationship with Russia will be more appreciated by USA because Chinese aggression against India and USA systemic and first order rivalry with China is the reason. So, moreover, once the reality of the rise of China becomes a concern for Moscow, it would potentially open conversations with USA to create a balance with China that suits Indian interest. And at the same time, if there is a approachment between USA and Russia or a reduction in the war of words between USA and China, it may or may not have a direct and substantive impact on China-India relationship, since the strains between their relationship is not just a product of global balance of power, but more fundamentally, it is a result of India-China dynamics in the Southern Asian region. So, by putting it differently, there is no matter what state of global geopolitics, what it is right now, and essentially the nature of India and China relationship is unlikely to undergo a fundamental transformation. Like for India, the principal antagonism is China. And for India, it must exploit strategies and their partnership which may help to address Chinese challenge more effectively. That means that India has to carefully balance its growing partnership with USA and in somewhat a delicate relationship what it has to maintain with Russia. So in such a sense, USA withdrawal from Afghanistan and India's relationship with Russia has helped India to adopt more flexible strategies with Afghanistan as well as broader region. And in the close relationship that India has enjoyed with USA, American presence in Afghanistan had in many ways limited India's options as India has been broadly encouraged to follow USA policy in the region. And with the Americans, now they have left Afghanistan, India can openly cooperate with Russia and even Tehran, especially under joint comprehensive plan of action, renegotiations succeed and engage Afghanistan and Central Asian region with their help. So if India plays its cards well, it can use Russia to gain more geopolitical heft in the region. And while USA has provided India status quo in the region, now Russia could provide India with more direct opportunities over there. And India would need to be prepared for adverse reactions from Beijing and Islamabad. So yet another area of cooperation between India and Russia, that is Indian Ocean region, especially Western Indian Ocean, where Russia has been expanding its influence, and India has significantly its interest over there. So for India, which is located in an unstable and virtually friendless neighborhood, friendship with Russia is important, notwithstanding the structural limits to such a friendship. It will, it will take a great deal of diplomatic agility from India to stay the course and improve the relationship with Russia amidst high stakes geopolitical contestations. Now, next article is high LPG prices are scorching the air pollution fight, reinstating subsidies on LPG refills for low-income households that can help reverse families going back to polluting fuels. So basically, LPG prices that has been seen recently, the prices has been hiked, and it is having various impacts on the low-income households where they can opt to go back towards traditional fuels, which is having various impacts on the health of the people, especially the female section, and environmental issues may aggravate it. So in this context, this article, which is important for the government policies for subsidies, which has been provided for LPG connections for the vulnerable sections of the society. So, what is the context of this article? That the recent increase in the price of LPG cylinders that has been a burning in many of the household budgets for more than a year now, and the price of LPG refills that has increased by more than 50% to over rupees 900 per cylinder in November this year, which is compared to around 600 over the past years. With no refill subsidies in place since May 2020, where there is a genuine concern about many households, now they have slipped back to using polluting solid fuels like for cooking, like firewood and cow dung cakes. So solid fuel, which is used for cooking, is a leading contributor to air pollution, and it is related to premature deaths in India as well, which is estimated somewhere around 6 lakh every year as per the Global Burden of Disease Study 2019. So to tackle this issue head on, Government of India has taken several measures to improve access to clean cooking energy. For instance, under Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana scheme, where government had distributed more than 80 million subsidized LPG connections. But how far have we managed to dissuade households from biomass? What more do we need to do as a country to move the needle further? So, sizing up India's LPG revolution, as per the India Residential Energy Survey 2020, which has been conducted by Council of Energy, Environment and Water, and Initiative for Sustainable Energy Policy, LPG has now been replaced biomass as the most common cooking fuel in India. And nearly 85% of Indian homes, which is having an LPG connection, and 71% use of it as their primary cooking fuel, as compared to only 30% a decade back. All right. So this reversal of trends that could be attributed to the success of Ujjwala Yojana and consumption-linked subsidies and gradual strengthening of the LPG distributorship. Needless to say, this would have significantly influenced the sector's contribution to air pollution However, the battle is only half won, and around 30% of Indian households that continue to rely on biomass as their primary cooking fuel, mainly because of high LPG prices. Another 24% stack LPG with biomass. So the practice of biomass usage is predominantly concentrated in rural areas, particularly among the states like Bihar, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, MP, Odisha, and West Bengal. And urban slums are also critical hotspots where use of biomass for cooking is widely prevalent. Easy availability of free biomass and lack of home delivery of LPG refills further reduce the efficacy of LPG as a reliable and affordable proposition. So, to sustain countries' momentum on clean cooking energy access and thereby cleaner air for all, we propose three key steps. What are these? The first is to reinstate the subsidies on LPG refill for low income households. So first is what reinstating the subsidies on LPG refill for low-income households, and at the current refill price, the average Indian household they had to spend 10% of their monthly expense on LPG to meet all its cooking energy needs. And as per CEEW study, that is just double the actual share of reported expenses on cooking energy as of March 2020. In this fact, nearly half of all the Indian households, they have to at least double their cooking energy expense to completely switch to LPG at current prices. And given the loss of income and livelihoods during the novel coronavirus pandemic, the ability of households to afford LPG on a regular basis has taken a further hit. So, resuming subsidies would be critical to support LPG use in many households. Our estimates suggest that an effective price of rupees 450 per LPG refill could ensure that the average share of actual household expenditure on cooking energy matches the pre-pandemic levels. And government could take this step into account as it reconsiders resuming LPG subsidy. Government can also explore diverse approaches to identify beneficiaries. This may include limiting the subsidy provision to 7 to 8 LPG refills annually and excluding well-to-do households using robust indicators. For instance, lowering the income-based exclusion limit for LPG subsidy to rupees 2,50,000 a year for rupees 10 lakh a year, or excluding families owning a non-commercial four-wheeler vehicle can significantly reduce the number of eligible beneficiaries. So at the bare minimum, subsidy must be resumed for the households granted LPG connections under the Ujjwala scheme. Now, secondly, boost timely availability of LPG for all the consumers. So only half the rural LPG users they receive home delivery of LPG refills. So first is about price. Okay, second is about availability. So now only half of the rural LPG users they receive home delivery of LPG refills, while the rest have to travel about 5 kilometers one way to procure a cylinder. So additional costs they have to bear. So gaps in the doorstep delivery of LPG cylinders, these are also present in urban pockets, particularly in slum areas. That is a major factor behind the use of biomass among urban slum households. There is a need to strengthen LPG supply chain and enforce timely service delivery, particularly in states with a large number of Ujjwala connections and slum population. So this must be complemented by higher incentives for rural distributors who have to otherwise service a low but distributed demand at similar commissions. Grouping in self-help groups that could also help aggregate demand and create jobs in distant areas. Thirdly, create a new market for locally available biomass. So government needs to pilot initiatives focused on promoting the use of locally available biomass in decentralized process units that manufacture briquettes and pellets of for industrial and commercial establishments. For instance, National Thermal Power Corporation, which recently had invited applications to supply biomass pellets to fire their power stations. So government can incentivize entrepreneurs to participate in such activities. Similarly, households can be incentivized to supply locally available biomass that include crop stubble or dung cakes to compressed biogas production plant that being set up under the sustainable alternative towards affordable transportation, that is SATAT scheme. Such measures that would help enhance local income and livelihood opportunities, in turn encouraging rural families to use LPG on regular basis. Then in August, Prime Minister has launched Ujjwala 2.0 scheme to distribute 10 million additional free LPG connections to poorer households. That shows that government's commitment towards promoting clean cooking energy access, but ensuring affordability and timely availability of LPG cylinders for refills, that would be a must to wean households away from polluting biomass and reap the benefits of the investments made in the Ujjwala scheme over the past 5 years. So, such efforts that need to go a long way in improving the health and well being of our citizens. That is all about this article. The next one: low tobacco tax, poor health. The absence of an increase in tax on tobacco products post GST has impacted revenue and could worsen public health. So, basically, how lower cost in tobacco, lower tax on tobacco is impacting the health. It is making the poor health. So that is a relationship correlation which has been talked about in this article. So context is what, that in India, 28.6% of adults above 15 years and 8.5% of students aged between 13 to 15 years, they use tobacco in some form or other. That makes the country second largest consumer in tobacco in the world. Tobacco, which is tobacco use that is known to be a major risk factor for several non-communicable diseases like cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, chronic lung diseases. India also bears an annual economic burden of over 1,77,340 crore on account of tobacco use. And there has been no major increase in taxation of tobacco products to discourage the consumption of tobacco in the past 4 years since the introduction of GST in 2017, except for a small increase in the national calamity contingent duty in 2020-21 under union budget, which only had effect of increasing the average price of cigarettes about 5%. So absence of an increase in tax means more profits for tobacco industry and more tax revenue foregone for the government. That is revenue that could have easily been utilized during the COVID-19 pandemic. So there had been a 3% real decline in GST revenues from tobacco products in each of the past 2 financial years. Average annual tax revenue collection from all tobacco products, which is based on past 3 years, that includes excise duty, national calamity contingent duty, GST, and compensation, says that is about 57,000, sorry, 53,750 crore. And excise taxes on many tobacco products that is used to be regularly raised in the annual union budgets before GST. Similarly, several state governments, they used to regularly raise value-added tax on tobacco products. And during the past 5 years, before the introduction of GST, most state governments had moved from having a low VAT regime on tobacco products to having a high VAT regime. The 17.3% relative reduction in the prevalence of tobacco use among adults that India experienced between 2009-10 and 16-17, as it had been shown by Global Adult Tobacco Survey, that could partly be attributed to this as well. And international literature recognizes tax increase as one of the most cost-effective ways of regulating and consumption of tobacco. So the lack of tax increases in the post-GST years might mean that some current smokers smoke more now and some non-smokers have started smoking. This could potentially lead to a reversal of declining trend in prevalence that might jeopardize India's commitment to achieving 30% tobacco use prevalence reduction by 2025, as it has envisaged in the National Health Policy of 2017 by the Government of India. So lack of tax increases means that tax burden on tobacco products, that is a tax as a percentage of the retail price, had decreased, and tax burden on bidis, cigarettes, smokeless tobacco on average stands at 22%, 53%, and 64% in 2021, while the World Health Organization has been recommending a uniform tax burden of at least 75% of each tobacco product. So, given that the vast majority of tobacco taxation today that is in the form of GST and compensation cess, and their revision requires consensus within the GST Council, tobacco taxation has not seen any increase whatsoever under the GST since 2017. In other words, the tobacco industry has been virtually enjoying 4 years without extended tax on tobacco products since the introduction of GST. This has made tobacco products more affordable post GST, as shown in recent literature from India. That is highly detrimental to public health. Then, meanwhile, the share of central excise duties that include national calamity contingent duty in the total tobacco tax is decreased from 54 to 8% for cigarettes, 17% to 1% for BDs, 59% to 11% for smokeless tobacco products on average from 2017, that was pre-GST level, to 2021, that is post-GST time period. So several countries in the world, they have high excise tax along with GST or sales tax. They are continuously being revised, and yet the excise duty on tobacco in India continues to remain extremely low. So the consequence of this low taxation on tobacco, that is leading to poor health. Basically, it has provided opportunities to those sections of the society who are now converting from non-smokers to smokers or non-tobacco to tobacco consumers. So because of lower price had contributed into into the consumption of tobacco at higher scale in India, that has been found. So, Union Health, they need to take a considerable view on public health and significantly increases excise taxes, either basic excise duty or national calamity contingent duty on all the tobacco products it is required to be imposed upon. So, upcoming Union budget, that gives a perfect opportunity for this. Budget should fix an excise duty of at least rupees 1 per stick of BDs, while aiming for a significant increase in the excise tax of cigarettes and smokeless tobacco products. Taxation should achieve a significant reduction in the affordability of tobacco products to reduce tobacco use prevalence and facilitate India's march towards sustainable development goals. That is all about this article. The next one, GST, that is Goods and Services Tax, as an unfinished agenda. Seen purely from a revenue point of view and as a fiscal policy tool, India's GST is still on a rocky road. This article is in the context of GS Paper 3. What is the unfinished agenda, which is regarding GST regime. So context of this article is what, that GST, that is an institutional tax innovation intensively marketed in many countries by International Monetary Fund and World Bank, that is wrapped in a one nation, one tax package. And it was accepted by India on the midnight of July 1st, 2017. So basically, GST is what? GST is a regime of one nation, one tax, which has propounded by IMF and World Bank as well. India had adopted this GST from 1st of July 2017. So despite the alleged haste in its launching by the central government, there was adaptations to make it to suit the Indian context. Being a landmark reform in India's tax history, it was expected to improve tax GDP ratio, end tax cascading, enhance efficiency, competitiveness, growth, and ensure lower prices. And it was also projected as a watershed in India's fiscal federalism. So states that has foregone a substantial part of their own tax revenue, they were in the turn guaranteed a GST compensation, which assures 14% growth in their GST revenue during the initial 5 years. And many exemptions along with direct tax rates as against a single rate in many countries have been accommodated to protect the interests of different stakeholders. So here some unresolved issues had been found out in GST regime. So even after 50 months in the existence, the number of relevant issues both for policy and action may remain unresolved. Like recently held international seminar on GST, which was organized by Gulati Institute of Finance and Taxation, which has brought together experts from India and select countries like Malaysia, New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, Brazil, Mexico, and Canada. That was a venue for a sui generis policy debate focusing on India's GST experience. So we were, as a participant observer, cherry-picked some of the observations that were made for reflection by policymakers and wider public. So India's GST architecture, that is built on the firm foundation of a GST council and a GST network, that is GSTN. So basically GST council, that is a council who looks after all the matters related to GST. First is the key decision-making body, which is chaired by Union Finance Minister with the Minister of State in charge of finance and the finance ministers of states as members. That is envisaged as a due federal process to protect the interest of the states. And GST network generates high frequency data and subjects them to analytics for informed policy making. So here, basically, federal process in the GST, that is what? That is the interest of the states, taken care by the finance minister, finance ministers Minister of State in the finance charge, and finance ministers of the state. So this is what this is basically envisaging federal process to protect the interest of states in GST. And GST network, it generates data, high frequency data, and subjects for the analytics for informed policy making. So built on this foundation, India's GST paradigm stands on two key pillars. These are revenue neutrality and GST compensation for the states. So revenue neutrality, it means it will generate revenue for the center as well as states. And whatever compensation loss would be there, that will be given by the center to the states. So designed on the principle of destination-based consumption taxation with seamless provisions for input tax credit with CGST, that is central GST, levied by the center, state GST by the state, UT GST by the union territory, and IGST levied on interstate supply, including imports. GST is applicable to all goods and services except alcohol for human consumption. 5 specified petroleum products with a common threshold exemption applicable to both CGST and SGST. So the assured revenue neutrality that remains a mirage in many states have experienced a declining tax GDP ratio. Studies show that in case of major 18 states, the ratio of own tax revenue to GDP has declined. And while the share of the center in total GST has increased by 6%, that of some states put together lagged behind with only a 4.5% increase. So a stark differences between revenue neutral rates for the producing states and consumption states have been observed. States that producing exempted food grains are also lost out. So since the rates were lower under GST and the VAT regime, revenue neutrality was not adhered ab initio. And the problems that has been compounded with massive evasion that has followed the dismantling of check post and later on fake invoices that grew by leaps and bounds. Exemptions and subventions complicated and worsened the situation. Like South African experience illustrates how zero rating and large exemptions have defeated revenue goals. In Mexico, although country had relied more on income tax with a standard rate of 16%, they could raise over 4% of GDP from GST. So reviewing 30 years of Canadian experience with GST, it is shown that GST could be improved by limiting zero rating, tax exemptions, and harmonizing tax rates. Brazilian experiences indicates that transfers through social security or subsidies tend to be more progressive than subventions or exemptions because reduced rates or zero rating do not usually get passed on to target groups or industries as happening in our country. So the resilience of economy at the time of rolling out of GST is critical for its wider reception, as the Australian experience shows. India was in the reverse gear given the downturn following demonetization. GST in India was possible only because the state surrendered much of their constitutionally inherited indirect taxes. And while the states collectively forwent 51.8% for their total tax revenue, center surrendered only 28.8%. And yet, GST is shared equally between center and states, despite two expert committees who had recommended for higher share of the states. Given the revenue neutrality failure and the host of other issues, many of these states are left with no option except to deepen on the GST compensation. While compensation legitimately has to coexist with GST, even the constitutionally guaranteed compensation for 5 years has not been implemented in letter and spirit, forcing the states to beg for their entitlement. That is not being conducive to sustainable cooperative federalism. Then there are other issues regarding IGST. So IGST, that is a key source of revenue for many of these states, and the clearinghouse mechanism and process that remains terra incognita. So it was pointed out that GST is discriminatory to manufacturing states, which indicates the need for a revenue sharing formula that duty incentivizes exporting states by sharing IGST revenue among three parties instead of two. So Malaysian experience demonstrates that the need for swift and transparent functioning of the input tax credit system, though a flawless IT infrastructure. Malaysia ended up abandoning GST owing to these vows. And we operate in an almost information vacuum, especially with the respect of IGST, along with several glitches in the digital architecture. GSTN is now in the doldrums. It neither makes effective use of the massive and invaluable data that is being generated, nor it shares them to enable others to make use of them. Such practice in data monopoly was a fact of history in India's statistical system and has to go sooner rather than later. Australia, that is having several similarities with India in terms of center and subnational units and destination-based multi-stage tax with input credit provisions, that has not been revenue buoyant. And GST revenue of Australia that has fallen relatively to GDP from 3.85% in 2003-4 to 3.28% in 18-19. So that is a matter for consideration whether such adventures like widening exemptions and replacing income tax by GST in case of small and medium enterprises are advisable measures in the Indian context. So GST should be seen purely from a revenue point of view and as a fiscal policy tool for efficiency, competitiveness, and growth. And even by this standard, India's GST is still on a rocky heart with several. All right, sorry. So GST should be seen purely from a revenue point of view and as a fiscal policy tool for efficiency, competitiveness, and growth. And by this standard, India's GST is still on a rocky road with several of the assumptions that is falling flat while expectations had been stand belied. And neither such states nor the consumers, they seem to have benefited since the rate reductions are not being translated into prices because of profiteering and cascading impact. So, despite many years of efforts in evolving an Indianized GST system and over 50 months of the adjustments with over 1,000 notifications, with accompanying uncertainties in the first year and COVID pandemic and lockdowns still in the saddle, GST continues to be an unfinished agenda. But how far and how long we will go like this? So there are many of the issues in GST regarding taxation slabs, different taxation slabs, regarding revenue compensation, sharing of revenue between center and states, falling burden of taxation on the consumers. Lots of things are there which we are not compatible with under GST regime. Many of the products which are kept out of the purview of GST and its price are still increasing, which is putting a burden, economic burden on the pockets of the consumers. So here a rationalization is required in the GST regime. Many of the issues that has need to be resolved. It's been 4 years now. Fifth year is approaching. So in these 5 years, what is the success of GST that need to be taken care of, and how long we will go like this with GST regime? That is a question. So that is all about this article. This is all about the day. Um, these are all such important articles which we had discussed in today's session. We'll come up with another set of articles on next Sunday. Till then, thank you so much. Have a nice weekend. Have a nice Sunday. Bye bye. Take care.